right, what's up, WNC? We're talking tariffs. What's going on? Do they affect us? How do they affect us right here at WNC, other than the expected possible price jumps or possible inflation? But what's the possible ripple effect? That's the question I want to talk about. How could it play out? What are the big questions? Help us out. Dr. Chris Cooper is a distinguished professor and director of the Institute for Public Policy at Western Carolina University. Hey, Chris. Thanks for being here. A whole lot to chew on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charles. Always good to see you.
Yeah. And, this is certainly the topic of the day. Yeah. Since President Trump announced the bulk of these tariffs, I've been asking the big question, why?
Yeah. I mean, that big question, and what happened to the money in my retirement? That's the other big question, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're not alone in that. I mean, one of the big questions that hits me is if you're somebody out there and you're 60, 65, or even 70 years old, and retirement is right at your doorstep, this is very critical.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely critical, right? I think you and I were having a conversation about aging before we started recording, right?
Yeah, right.
And so all this stuff becomes really important, right? Just sort of an accident of where you are in the life cycle when this happens, right? I still have a little while before retirement. I'm not super worried right now. If I were 65, I'd be downright terrified.
Right.
So anyway, to your actual...
Well, on that note, then we'll hop back into here. But I was driving to work yesterday. I was listening to CNBC. Mm-hmm. And the analyst was talking about that. And his advice to folks was just sit it out. 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to be fine. Everything comes back. And I thought, well, that's a little consolation for somebody who needs it before then.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. If you have time, if your time horizon's big, I think that is great advice. But if your time horizon's smaller because of retirement, because you're about to move into a senior living facility, because you might be at the end of life, because maybe you're about to pay for your kid's college and on a mortgage, on and on and on, it's kind of hard to give that advice. And President Trump has said, look, just hold on. Essentially, let's take our medicine. Right. Let's take our hits for a little while. We're going to win the match in the end. And I think that is probably good advice for some folks and probably remarkably bad advice for other folks.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and let's start at the beginning for any listeners out there who aren't quite sure what a tariff is.
Sure.
Yeah. What's a tariff?
Yeah. A tariff it's essentially a tax on another country's goods, right? So many of the things we have in the studio or in life, right, come from other countries. We don't make everything in the United States. And so it's saying, all right, for this, and Donald Trump's tariffs in particular are going to say from this country, we're going to charge a tariff, essentially a tax on those goods of, call it 15%. Another country, you might say it's 22% or 27%. And so that gets put on the goods. And the knock a lot of people have on these tariffs is, if I'm if I own a business, I'm not going to take those tariffs for myself. What am I going to do? I'm going to pass it on to the consumer to make sure that I still make the same amount of money.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. I know we hear out there, well, that's a tax on the consumer, but you just said it's a tax on the country's goods.
Yes, that's right.
But the issue is it gets passed along.
That's right. So it is really a tax on, to be specific, the goods that come from the country, right? Okay. So not necessarily ones that are produced by, let's say, Norway, but businesses in Norway that are going to ship things to the United States. And so what we know happens throughout history is anytime you have these big tariffs, again, companies want to make money, right? They are in it for the profit. So what are they going to do? They're not going to absorb all of that. They're going to pass it on. So if you're buying, like I ride bikes a lot, I ride mountain bikes in my spare time. So let's say my tires are produced in another country.
Right.
One option is for the specialized company that makes these tires to take that hit themselves and charge me the same amount of money. The other more likely option is they're going to charge me more for those tires so they still make the same amount of money.
Right. Let's say I'm a Nissan car dealer and I'm selling a Nissan for $40,000, but now there's going to be a 25% tariff on it, approximately.
Right.
So I need to sell that car for $50,000 to pay that tariff.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so they're going to pass that on to the consumer. Now, I think at the outset, before I went on whatever rabbit hole I went down, you asked me kind of why are we doing this, right? And so, look, I think Donald Trump, he just likes tariffs because he likes tariffs, right? And I think he believes that the United States is getting a raw deal from some countries more than others. So he says, look, yeah, it's going to be tough for a little while. Yeah, the stock market's going to take a hit. But in the long run, we're going to force these companies to produce these goods in the United States, and that's what's going to benefit us in the end. That's his argument.
Well, on that note, I want to stop you for a second and just go back to last Tuesday, April 2nd. President Trump imposed tariffs on about 90 countries. There were big countries like China and India, not Russia, but China and India, but small countries like Lesotho and Sri Lanka. And it's one thing to ask for parity from maybe another big country, but from a small country like Lesotho that's basically making denim for jeans.
That's right.
And shipping them to companies like Levi or Wrangler, who are buying it at a good price, assumably. But are they ever going to be able to buy enough American product
That's right.
to have any kind of parity?
No, is the short answer to that question, right, Charles? And that's, so a lot of folks have been trying to figure out, okay, what was the formula he used? Like, so Donald Trump's put some math on the screen, right? And there was some sigmas and there was some alphas, and it wasn't in like an emoji world. These were like actual mathematical symbols that are supposed to represent things. And so what he was saying was that that essentially if we ship more goods to another country than they ship to us, if we sell more to them than they sell to us, that is, one thing. But if it goes the other direction, you can see a deficit. So he says, hey, if there's a trade deficit, that's bad. Donald Trump says that's evidence of this country's doing the wrong thing for the United States. We're not getting the good deal. So that's why we're slapping the tariff on it. That's his argument.
Well, that's really interesting. We're going to get back into that in a moment.
Yeah.
I want to bring the latest news up here, which is with regard to China. On that day, Liberation Day, April 2nd, he lifted tariffs against China by about 25%. I think they're at 54% right now. China then responded with tariffs against the United States. President Trump has now said if they don't withdraw those tariffs, he's going to up them by another 50% on China. China is calling that blackmail. Is that blackmail, or is that just playing it tough?
I mean, maybe it's the same thing. Why not both, right? To make it another meme. I think it really might be both. Yeah, it is blackmail, and they're saying we're only going to do this thing if you do some other thing. That is blackmail. That's also playing it tough. Now, I think the thing that I hope folks are thinking about is, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my neighbors? What does this mean for my family? And if we do get in this trade war that appears we're going to be in with China, and we know how many goods we get from China, what is that going to mean for the cost of our goods and how far our dollars go? And how does the market respond to this? And at least thus far, we're having this conversation on April 8th, the market has not responded well.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. Well, we're sort of laying the pieces down here. And one of those pieces is, the possible reasons here.
Yeah.
Back in the beginning, we heard the word fentanyl a lot. Like these tariffs needed to be in place so we can control the flow of fentanyl into the United States through China, Mexico, Canada. Now we're not hearing fentanyl at all. We are hearing manufacturing, though. Bring manufacturing, as you just mentioned, back to the States, and also jobs. Are these the reasons, do you think? Or are these masking something else?
I mean, I really think, as odd as it sounds, I think Donald Trump likes tariffs because Donald Trump likes tariffs. Like, I don't know that – I think it is sort of a solution in search of a problem.
Okay.
And I think that's been pretty clear in the fact that Donald Trump does kind of move around on the reasons for this. I think at the end of the day, he likes tariffs because he thinks we're getting a raw deal. He thinks he is the master deal maker, right? Wrote a book, or at least had a book
Art of the
written
Deal,
for him,
right?
Art of the Deal, right? That's his whole shtick. And so he thinks he can get us a better deal, and he thinks he can do it with every country in the world except us simultaneously, which is a heck of a heavy lift.
Well, and then there's also the question about just power.
That's right.
Raw power there, too. I want to put an example out here. If I own a sneaker company like Nike, I make my sneaker in somewhere in Southeast Asia. Could be Vietnam, could be Laos, Cambodia, wherever, Taiwan. And I make it for X amount of dollars, and I'm able to sell it here for $100. $100 sneaker, not uncommon today.
Nope. I bought a pair the other day.
There you go. Now there are tariffs, and say they're 46% tariffs. So now that sneaker, in order to recover that tariff, is going to sell for $146 approximately. What happens if that company, if I decide, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move my manufacturing back to the United States. Instead of paying workers $5 a day now, I got to pay them $25 an hour.
That's right.
To make that sneaker here. Or I can automize my plant, my manufacturing plant, make it high tech, and maybe employ just a handful of workers, but I have to buy a whole lot of automated machinery and technology to make that happen. And I'm probably going to pass that cost on in my sneakers to consumers as well.
That's right.
Either way I look at it, I'm not seeing a sneaker that I'm buying for under $100. Either way, it looks like there's going to be a jack up in the prices. Am I wrong? Am I thinking here?
No, I think you're right. And I think if Donald Trump were in this room, he would probably say yes, and we'd still be employing American workers, right? So I think he would ultimately argue that that's a good thing. But to add to maybe the other side of the ledger, all this takes time, right? I mean, as you know, Charles, you can't just say I'm gonna make a factory in Kansas and one just appears. I mean, it takes, most economists I've heard say, about 4 years realistically. If you say, okay, I want to put a factory in Lawrence, Kansas, or in Hendersonville, North Carolina, that's 4 years. And so what they need to know to invest that kind of money is what the future is going to look like. And what these tariffs have done is put a massive amount of uncertainty into the air. So if you are Nike, you may not want to move to Hendersonville or to Lawrence, Kansas, not even because you don't think the math would work out right now, but because you have no clue what the math is going to be like 4 years from now, given that this is the biggest trade uncertainty we've ever introduced in the history of the world.
Well, you know what? On that note, you're talking about sometimes great American companies. By great, I mean big, I mean successful, I mean have a global footprint. And when it comes to making sure other countries don't take advantage of us and kind of making them pay, are we also maybe making our own great American companies pay? And what I mean by that is I look at Apple. Apple has lost close to 20% in value over the past less than a week. And that's a huge number. They're also heavily invested in China and Vietnam. Those tariffs are high. If they continue to make their product there, they're going to have to increase the price on it by a lot. And if they've already committed to building more factories here, but if they do that and source all the materials it takes to make those things here, by the time they do that and make that investment, this product's going to be really expensive. Apple is the biggest, wealthiest company on the planet in terms of actual cash it has. What does this do to that company? What does it do to all the shareholders, the people who have retirement investments in Apple? It can't help it.
No, and I think we've seen that, right? I mean, the market has taken a massive nosedive in the last, since the beginning of April, right? Since Liberation Day. So no, I think all this. Look, what do markets hate? Uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we know. And what have we introduced here is massive amounts of uncertainty. So I think your Apple example is a great one, right? This is not only going to affect foreign companies, but American companies. Years ago, I went and heard a talk from an economist about socks. I was like, man, it's going to be boring talk. It was fascinating. And the takeaway was we would make socks in North Carolina, and then we ship them to Mexico to stitch the end of the sock. You know, the gold toe?
Yeah.
That actually gets stitched in another country and then sent back to the United States because of how much cheaper it is to do that. So even something like the white tube sock that you get at Walmart for a few bucks in the big package is affected, even if it's an American company, a North Carolina company, in ways you may not expect.
Unless you get it stitched here, but then there's the cost of doing that.
That's right.
And it may be more than the cost of sending it to Mexico. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it.
That's exactly right.
From one Apple to another, let's localize this. Obviously, apple growing is a big industry here. How might tariffs affect that?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, so look, obviously they're coming from the ground here in Western North Carolina, but whatever pesticides, whatever they're using to grow these apples probably comes, at least part of it, from another country. If you've got any sort of heavy machinery that you're using to grow apples, yes, that probably some of that comes from another country. Right. So even something that just, I mean, it is from the earth. It seems like there's nothing more
right.
local than growing apples. It's not just one person picking apples in an orchard like a children's book, right? This is a massive operation that is affected by the global stage. We have opened up a global economy for good or ill. That's what we've got.
Well, it's made me wonder also about like Washington apples. It's my understanding that Washington apples, or Washington sells more apples than we do in Western North Carolina. And I've wondered what happens if they no longer have a market outside of the U.S.? Does that glut the apple market?
I think it very well could.
Right. And suddenly we've got apples that aren't being sold because you have too many apples trying to sell within the United States.
Yep. That's exactly right. I think that is very possible. Think about something like beer, right? So it looks like we're going to see massive increase in the cost of cans. So even if you have like your local brewery here in Western North Carolina, I live 4 blocks from a local brewery. I walk down there, I get a beer. It feels like there's nothing more local, nothing that's affected by, less by the world economy. But absolutely, it's affected by the world economy, right? These hops might actually get shipped in from another country. The cans they're going to put the beer in, the price of that's going to increase. So even your local business is going to be affected in one way or the other.
Yeah, and if you like Guinness or a German beer,
you're
going to be paying a lot more.
Pony up.
Hey, I've had a question about the president maybe sort of rising up out of this, like take a 30,000 foot look at it. Is there something else he's trying to do? Does he actually want to maybe upend the global economic order and even political order?
Yeah.
Like, is there a bigger picture here for him?
I think very possibly, right? And so a couple come to mind. One, I think I have you to thank, because you sent me a text just the other day about an article about the Mar-a-Lago Accord, right? So this is the idea that that what Donald Trump really wants to do is to devalue the United States dollar to make it so our goods essentially are more affordable, with the idea that they will drive the economy and the market up that way. And to do that, you essentially have to tear down the economic order that was already there. So there's that piece. And then I think there's also a piece about the power of the presidency, right? I mean, right now we're seeing the United States Senate try to kind of come back at Trump a little bit.
Yeah, including Republicans.
Including Tom Tillis, our own United States Senator from North Carolina, who
Ted
just
Cruz.
signed on. Ted Cruz, Grassley. And so what they're arguing from the Senate is, look, the president shouldn't have the power to just like set tariffs in perpetuity. The United States Constitution says that we're the ones, the Congress, really the House, who has the power to regulate this trade. So they're saying, hey, let's pass a law that says that the president can do whatever he wants, but like for 60 days.
Right.
And then we get to come in and adjust those tariffs back down. Donald Trump, not surprisingly, said, I'll veto that bill.
Yeah, now these are basically, you're talking about the same restrictions the president has on putting American troops into harm's way.
That's right.
He's got about 60 days, maybe 90, I'm not sure.
90, I believe, yeah. Exactly. Same idea. So to say, hey, look, President, we understand you have to act, with emergency powers sometimes quickly, but you can't keep those going forever. At some point, you got to come check with us, and we get to say if it's okay or not. Let's sort of get back to some basic balance of power idea that the country is founded on. Whether this flies or not, we'll see.
Well, Mike Johnson, I understand, has come out against this.
That's right.
And the president or the White House has said he will veto that if it comes to him. But at least there's some pushback there, which is kind of interesting, because that shows some Republicans are stepping to the table and saying, okay, this may be a bit too far or a bit too rash.
Yeah, and look, they're scared for their jobs. Right. So you've got, again, let's listen.
Yeah, you're right.
Right?
They're coming up for election, some of them, very shortly, yeah.
That's exactly right. So some of these senators are, hello, Tom Tillis, but also all 435 members of the United States House. Yeah. And so, if we think about a guy like Chuck Edwards here in Western North Carolina, Chuck Edwards, he won by healthy margin last time, healthy margin the time before. He's expected to win by healthy margin, but he is the most vulnerable Republican in the state. We thought that's not
Yeah.
too vulnerable. But boy, if we see a big shift of the tides like we saw towards the Republicans in 94,
Yeah.
maybe a Chuck Edwards goes down.
Well, he has said to us numerous times, this is a quote, I 100% support President Trump on tariffs. He's rolling the dice there.
He's absolutely rolling the dice there. And I think every Republican member of Congress in any district that is possibly competitive is rolling the dice. They're also rolling their own dice, right? I mean,
Right.
Chuck Edwards has a 401k as well. Chuck Edwards has money in the stock market as well. And
Right.
he's seeing his own, if everybody has the app,
Yeah,
right? That's going to
yeah, right?
That's only gone one way recently. Now, look, maybe it comes back. Maybe we have this conversation, we do talking tariffs 2.0, and we say,
Right.
man, Trump nailed it. He was totally right. But that is a lot of eggs in that basket.
It is a lot of eggs in that basket, and he's got a lot on the line there. Hey, on the question of the dollar, the value of the dollar,
Yeah.
that hit me, and I think that's important because just for our listeners to try to understand this like I am.
Totally.
When people in other countries buy American products, they may buy it in their currency, but they really don't. They buy it in dollars.
That's right.
Because when we buy products from other countries, we buy those products in dollars. I'm going to buy that Nissan, and dollars are going to go into Japan. So the dollar has really become the global currency.
That's exactly right.
And, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a great advantage in that for us, politically and economically.
Sure.
That's probably served us for the past 80 years.
Yeah, no, I think you are exactly right. Politically, it's powerful. Economically, it means that we are the country that matters, right? I mean, if you are the standard with which everybody else is making all these economic transactions, that's incredibly important, right? That is a real sign of power. And if you add to that English is usually the common language, right? You go almost anywhere in the globe at this point, they do speak English. So we are the touchstone politically, in terms of communication, in terms of economics. And so if that changes, it's going to mean something very different about America's place in the world stage.
I lived for years in New York, Miami, places where I saw a lot of people from other countries come and invest in the United States. They brought money here because the United States was considered the most stable country on the planet. May still be, I don't know. But if you destabilize the dollar, that may start to shift.
Yeah.
And also, I wonder about some other currency taking its place.
Sure. And I think there's, the possibility that some currency in another country takes the place. And obviously there's this massive crypto question.
Right.
That's out there as well. So the state of North Carolina, for example, has been flirting with the idea of putting some state money into cryptocurrency. So this is truly uncharted waters in terms of other countries, but also in terms of this crypto world that I don't think any of us understand very well.
Well, what's interesting for me on that, and this is a new thought you just birthed for me, was, what if there's some intention there? I mean, I don't know, maybe not at all, but the whole idea that if you destabilize world currencies and possibly weaken the dollar as the global currency, are you upping the possibility of crypto taking its place? And the problem, if you will, with crypto is that it's really not backed by anything.
That's right. It's not backed by anything. I think there's obviously some environmental problems as well, like a lot of folks have talked about.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, it's not backed by anything. And I don't think anybody has a really good understanding. Well, very few people have a really good understanding of exactly what's happening with crypto.
Yeah,
and
no.
it is, I find it incredibly confusing myself. I've worked very hard to try to understand it.
Right.
I'm getting there, and I got a long ways to go. People are investing in something that I think sometimes they don't really understand. That's fine. That's their personal choice. When we start basing government decisions on it, that's something else entirely.
All right. Goods versus services. It seems the president, when he looks at a trade deficit, he's really talking about goods. He's talking about stuff we make, stuff you can put your hands on. But I was in Spain last summer, and I was surprised at how many American fast food restaurants I saw. McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut. And they were filled with Spanish people buying those products. I went to the corner store. I saw a bag of Doritos, I bought some M&Ms. They may be manufactured there, but these are American companies. And you would think that would somehow be factored in. And then I went to my hotel and I popped up Netflix. And I thought, okay, here's an American service I'm taking advantage of here. I walked down the street and I heard Beyonce. I hear American music coming out of stores. And to not take all of that into account when you're talking about trade deficits, this is something that we are putting out there into the world and the globe is consuming.
Yeah.
So just to look at like a physical good like this pen or a coffee cup may not be an accurate assessment.
No, that's exactly right. How many people do you know who have gone to another country to see Taylor Swift because it's cheaper?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well put. Yeah.
Every dad I know is taking their daughter
Yeah.
to Europe to do just that. So absolutely, right? It's not just about goods, but this formula that Trump came up with, or that Trump's people came up with, or if you believe some folks that AI came up with, really is just looking at goods. It is a lot more complicated than that. And I think that also reflects a bit, you talked before about political power and cultural power. And if these countries really do respond with all sorts of anti-American, whether it's, putting trade back against us and just not listening to American music, not buying Krispy Kreme donuts, not, all of these different things that represent America, I think are going to take a hit. I think we're already seeing that in Canada very much. And I think we're going to see that from other countries as well.
A long time ago now, about 20 years ago, I was in Russia and I was in Moscow. And there was a bus stop there. And there was a movie poster on the side of the bus stop. It was for the movie Pearl Harbor with Ben Affleck. And I thought to myself, like, this is no big deal to these Russians walking by it. But when have we ever walked by a bus stop in our nation's capital across from the White House and seen an ad for a Russian movie?
Yeah.
But to them, it's normal.
That's right.
And it's a great example of how we export American culture
Yes.
and film
Absolutely.
around the world.
Yeah. Our actors, our musicians are known, across the world.
They're ambassadors in a way.
They are absolutely ambassadors in a way, and you just don't see that as much coming in the other direction. Is that a sign of a trade deficit or a trade surplus? I don't know. What I do know is it does represent something about power and cultural currency.
Bringing it back to Western North Carolina for a moment, there are some companies here that I did want to talk about a little bit. GE Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, these are like modern tech, forward-leaning companies. I don't know what the effect would be on them, but my guess is they must sell some of their products overseas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know, the ins and outs of every one of those companies either, but I find it hard to believe that they are not selling some of their products overseas, and I find it very hard to believe they're not affected by these tariffs in some way, shape, or form.
So they've got to have their eyes on this as well.
I think everybody has their eyes on this, and it really comes down to, do you trust Donald Trump in the end that this is a temporary hit, but we're going to win in the end? And if you trust Donald Trump, you're probably going to continue to do so. If you tend to trust government officials a little less, tend to trust Trump a little less, I think you're going to be pretty concerned.
I had somebody come up to me at Ingalls to talk to me about this. One of the good and bad things about TV is they always assume you know all these issues. But and she said to me, I really want to trust President Trump on this, but I wish he would tell us why.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the missing component here a bit, other than just sort of trust me. And I mean, and that's a big question we're talking about, is the why. And speaking of that, I want to touch, I think, just one more thing here. Debt, deficit, budget, taxes. Somehow this is all rolled into this idea that we're cutting federal spending and we need to raise more money. So I do wonder, is there another reason behind here? President Trump has said numerous times he wants to, quote, abolish the IRS. Now, is that going to happen or not? I don't know.
Right.
But is he possibly thinking that revenue from tariffs could at some point be enough to replace revenues from the IRS, especially if you cut some of the cost of government.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think he might be thinking that. Now, the evidence from Doge suggests that they really haven't saved us that much money.
Right.
Culturally, it may be very successful. I don't
Yeah.
think economically it is that successful. I don't think that math's going to work. I don't think those sums are going to even out.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that's very possible that that's what he thinks. I mean, he believes that soon we're going to see big benefit from these tariffs. Again, most economists would disagree.
Well, and then the other question is, or variable is, what if people around the planet start buying fewer American products?
That's right. Which seems to be already happening, at least to some degree.
On that question, the abolishing the IRS question and shifting the tax burden to, revenue to tariffs, it also shifts the tax burden.
That's right.
Because as I understand it, right now, whatever the distribution is, it will shift more towards working and middle class people. And it will relieve the upper part of our society from some of their current tax burden.
Yeah, I think that is exactly right. Now, I think if you believe in this as smart economics, what you would say is that's right. It's trickle-down economics, right? What we heard from Ronald Reagan, what we heard from George H.W. Bush, we heard to a lesser degree from George W. Bush, that these are the folks who are the producers, essentially, and that if they're paying less taxes, they are going to, help the market work better. That is, again, a lot of trust and a very small number of people whose incentive is to continue to make a lot of money.
If you own one of these companies and you were super wealthy, Chris, which you may be for all I know, that what comes to you is going to trickle down and you're going to make basically all of us better off.
That's right.
But at the same time, my sister asked me, she said, if there's so many wealthy people that are supporting President Trump, I can't believe they would do it and wouldn't speak up and stop him unless they really believed this was the right thing. And, I heard that. But at the same time, I thought, if there are winners and losers here, and if it relieves their tax burden, if that is part of this conversation, I mean, they're certainly not going to be the losers.
No, they're not. Right. I think that's the one thing we know is that they will make sure they are not, the decision makers are not going to be the losers in the scheme. And I think you're exactly right. This is, look, I hope they're right. I hope Donald Trump is right. I hope this is the smartest play that nobody sees coming.
Yeah.
On April 8th, it doesn't appear that way.
Well, I was going to say, I don't want to throw President Trump under the bus here because for all I know, his genuine belief is that this is the best thing for America, the American economy. We're going to pull manufacturing back here. Even if it doesn't hire many people, that it will have a ripple effect through the economy that will cause more better paying jobs right here at home. But then there's a question of, can America today be that insular? Can we be kind of a closed economy? Can we cut out the world and produce all of our goods here and consume them all and not really worry about anybody else?
And I think, the last 100 years of economic history would say, no, that game is over, right? We made this decision a long time ago. And frankly, a whole lot of Republicans were on board with being less protectionist, with the idea that this is a global economy. So this is, let's make no mistake, right? He may be right, but this is a massive gamble.
Okay.
And this is a massive gamble for real people in their retirement. So let's, again, think through the local implications of that for a second. Let's say you're 60, you were thinking about retiring, and your 501k just took a massive hit. Now you're going to hold on for another, just call it 3 years for the sake of argument. The people that are getting out of college or getting out of high school and looking for the job, that job may not be open.
Yeah.
Right? And so the trickle-down effects in a negative sense are also very, very real. So it is a massive gamble. This runs counter to what every economist that I have read says that we know about tariffs and the effect of tariffs. Heck, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? The most famous scene is who actually ends up being a conservative economist in the end, talking about what Smoot-Hawley did when we put that in, which was to make the Great Depression worse.
Right. And I think something that we lose sight of because we have actually been living in pretty good times for a good chunk of time here is that when these things happen, they don't turn around. You fall into a real recession, or God forbid, worse than that, it can take a generation to turn around.
Yeah.
And you don't want to lose that. You don't want the 18-year-old who's ready to go out and start their life to start it with that tide against them, that current against them. That said, I think we have a couple options here. One is President Trump could change his mind on some of these, and he could do that soon. He could find a way to negotiate with some countries that would give him a plausible way out and a win. So that's something that's on the table. The other thing, like you said, is it could play out. What happens between now and then is the big question. Given that you and I don't have any real power over this, I mean, we could go out and protest somewhere if we disagreed with it, or show up in support of it too,
That's right.
if we want to. But nobody, including the president, are suggesting this is a quick little race here. This is going to take a while.
Yeah, this is absolutely going to take a while. I think this is, if you're listening to this podcast, this should not be the first or the last time you're thinking about this issue, right? This should be a quick primer because we're going to be in this world for a while, positive or negative.
Right. And as we wrap up here, there's something my years of teaching school, I taught civics and U.S. history to middle schoolers. But it's funny how much of that's pertinent today.
Absolutely.
Something I used to tell them, because there was always a conversation about whether or not the United States was in decline, whether or not we were losing position to China. And I would remind them that in the history of the world, I don't think there has ever been a country that has been so dominant culturally, politically, economically, militarily, and technologically. That's enormous. And China isn't even close to that now. But by turning the table over, who knows?
It might even the global playing field in a way that I think Donald Trump does not want. You're exactly right. I mean, we are the dominant country in every way you just named.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right to highlight technologically and how much that has been a game changer for every other part of American power and how much this could shift it.
Well, Chris Cooper, thank you for joining us, Dr. Chris Cooper. And I may have to have you back in a year and we'll talk about what happened.
Sounds great. Good to
right.
see you.